Imagine the impossible. An elderly man, 85 years old, sustained by unshakable faith, faces alone 3 gigantic warriors, descendants of Anak, whose steps made the ground tremble. Before thousands of witnesses, this man, frail to human eyes, became a lion in battle, and in a matter of moments, the giants lay prostrate in the dust, while Hebron surrendered to God's promise. But this extraordinary victory raises questions that go beyond the battle. Who really was Caleb? How could he cross 40 years of desert, survive the burial of an entire generation, and reach old age stronger than in his youth? What was it about his life that defied time, fear, and even logic? Would it be an unusual human resistance? A natural talent for war? Or was the secret in a divine promise that transformed him into an eternal warrior? Get ready, because in this story, you will uncover the truth shocking about the man who kept his flame burning when all others had gone out, the faithful warrior who turned defeat into legacy and fear into conquest. Watch until the end and find out the mystery of Caleb's immortal faith, the same faith that can raise invisible giants before you and bring them down one by one. Join us as we dive into one of the most inspiring stories in the Bible, where Caleb, though born under the weight of slavery, dared to believe that God's promises were greater than any giant. Get ready to walk with him from the chains of Egypt to the conquest of Hebron. Now Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, "You know the word that the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about me and you." Joshua 14:6. Here begins the story of Caleb. The scorching Egyptian sun offered no mercy to the bodies bent over the clay bricks. Among the thousands of Hebrew slaves groaning under the whips of their Egyptian overseers was a young man with piercing eyes and an indomitable spirit, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, a descendant of the tribe of Judah. "Faster, you Hebrew dogs!" shouted Foreman Amenhotep, cracking his whip in the air. "Pharaoh demands that the walls of Pi-Ramesses be completed before the next full moon." Caleb looked up, sweat streaming down his tanned face, and met the gaze of his father, Jephunneh, who was working a few feet away. "Keep your head down, my son," Jephunneh whispered as the foreman walked away. "Our time will come. The God of our fathers has not forgotten us." Caleb was born in the region of Goshen, where the children of Israel had multiplied extraordinarily. During 400 years of captivity, his father, Jephunneh, was a man of Kenizzite lineage, a people who had united with the Hebrews through marriage and fidelity to the God of Abraham. Caleb's mother, Miriam, was a direct descendant of Judah, carrying in her veins the royal blood of promise. One particularly cold night, when Caleb was only 12 years old, his mother called him and his younger brothers, Othniel and Seraiah. "Come, my children," Miriam said, her eyes shining in the light of the small oil lamp. "It is time for you to hear again the words that keep us alive." "Mom, why should we listen to these stories if we're stuck here forever?" asked Seraiah, the youngest just 8 years old. "Forever," Miriam smiled sadly. "Nothing in this world lasts forever, my little one. Listen to what the Lord promised our father Abraham. Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. And I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will come out with great riches." 400 years, Othniel murmured. "Almost all of them have passed, haven't they, mother?" "Yes, my son. The time of the promise is approaching." The slaves' mud houses were piled one upon the other on the outskirts of Egypt's great cities. The smell of sweat mixed with red clay dust permanently permeated that place of suffering. One morning, as Caleb, was shaping bricks under the merciless sun. An old man named Hur collapsed beside him. The foreman approached with heavy steps. "Get up, you useless old man," the Egyptian ordered, raising his whip. Caleb, then 16 years old, placed himself between the foreman and the elder. "He needs water, sir. Let me give him a drink and he can get back to work." The foreman narrowed his eyes. "Who are you to tell me what to do, slave? I'm just someone who knows that a dead worker can't make bricks," Caleb replied with calculated calm. "And Pharaoh needs his bricks, doesn't he?" The Egyptian hesitated, then lowered the whip. 5 minutes. "If he doesn't get up, you'll both taste my whip." As he helped her drink, the old man squeezed his hand. "You are brave, young Caleb. You remind me of another young man I knew many years ago, a prince of Egypt who defended one of us. A prince defending the Hebrews." Caleb frowned. "His name was Moses. He grew up in the palace, but he had Hebrew blood. He killed a foreman for defending one of our people and fled into the desert. At that time, Pharaoh Ramses II ruled with an iron fist. In his throne room, he conferred with his advisors. 'The Hebrews are multiplying like plagues,' declared the Pharaoh, his voice echoing off the golden columns. 'We must control them before they outnumber us.' "Your Majesty," suggested the Vizier Amenemheb, "we can increase their workloads, break their spirits with even heavier labor." "It's not enough," Ramses roared. "Decree, every Hebrew boy born must be thrown into the Nile. Only the girls will live." The decree spread like wildfire. In the homes of Goshen, the wailing of mothers echoed night after night. How could a god allow such horror? Cried a young mother hugging her newborn baby. Caleb's grandfather Hezron, a respected elder among the Hebrews, gathered the families together in his home. "Listen to me," he said, his voice trembling with age but firm with conviction. "The Lord sees our affliction. Just as Joseph was sold into slavery and then became governor of Egypt, so our slavery will precede our liberation." "Fine words, Hezron," interrupted a man named Dathan, "but words won't save our children from the river." "No, but faith will save them," Hezron replied. "Haven't you heard about the girl Miriam? How she saw her little brother placed in a basket in the river and then rescued by Pharaoh's own daughter? This boy, Moses, was raised as a prince. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Years passed. Caleb, now a man of 25, had become respected among his people. One afternoon, as he was returning from work, he found a young woman crying near the well. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently. "My father is sick and can't work," she replied, lifting her tear-filled brown eyes. "The foreman said that if he doesn't come back tomorrow, our family won't get any rations." "What's your name?" "Ephrath, daughter of Ephraim." "Ephrathah," Caleb said with determination. "Tomorrow I will tell the foreman that your father is helping in my section. I will do the work for 2. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because we are all children of the same promise," Caleb replied, "and because something tells me that you will not be a stranger forever." And so it was. Caleb and Ephratah were married the following year in a simple but hopeful ceremony. During the ceremony, a breathless messenger arrived. "News from the desert," he shouted. "Moses has returned." A stunned silence fell over the meeting. "Moses?" someone whispered. "After 40 years?" "Yes," the messenger confirmed. "He and his brother Aaron are summoning the elders. They say the Lord has sent them to deliver Israel." The next morning, Caleb was among the crowd gathered to hear Moses. The man before them did not look like the prince. The stories described. His hair was white, his hands calloused, but his eyes burned with a fire unearthly. "People of Israel," Moses proclaimed, his voice carrying supernatural authority, "the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob appeared to me on Mount Horeb." What did he say? Someone from the crowd shouted, He said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows, and I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians." A murmur of hope ran through the crowd, but Korah, one of the tribal leaders, raised his voice. "What about Pharaoh? Do you think he'll just let us go?" Moses raised his staff. "The Lord gave me signs to show Pharaoh. Observe." He threw his staff to the ground, and it turned into a serpent. Cries of astonishment echoed. When Moses caught the serpent by its tail, it turned back into a staff. "This is the power of the God of Israel," Moses declared. "Tomorrow Aaron and I will go to Pharaoh. We will say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go.'" At the palace, the confrontation was epic. Caleb, like many Hebrews, anxiously awaited news. "What happened?" Ephrath asked when Caleb returned that night. "Pharaoh refused," Caleb said grimly. "Worse still, he increased our burden. Now we must make bricks without straw." So Moses failed. "No, my love, this is just the beginning. I feel in my spirit that great things are to come." And Caleb was right. In the days that followed, terrible plagues began to fall upon Egypt. First, the Nile turned to blood. "See," Moses cried out before Pharaoh, "the river you worship as a god has become a curse." "Tricks," replied the Pharaoh. "My magicians can do the same." But when the magicians tried to replicate the divine signs, their power proved limited. With each plague, frogs, lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, Egypt was devastated, while Goshen remained untouched. During the plague of darkness, Caleb found his brother Othniel trembling with fear. 3 days of total darkness over the Egyptians, but we have light, said Othniel. How is this possible? It is the power of the Lord, Caleb replied. He is showing that there is a difference between his people and their oppressors. The night before the 10th plague, Moses gathered all the heads of families together. Tonight the Lord will pass through the land of Egypt, he announced solemnly. Every firstborn will die, from the son of Pharaoh to the son of the servant girl, but you will be protected by the blood of the lamb. What should we do? Caleb asked. Each family shall take a lamb without defect. At dusk, sacrifice it and smear its blood on the doorposts and lintel. When the destroyer sees the blood, he will pass over your houses. Caleb did exactly as he was told. That night, as his family ate the roasted lamb with bitter herbs and unleavened, bread, he instructed them, eat quickly with your loins girded, sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. This is the Lord's Passover. After this night, nothing will be the same again. At midnight, a terrible scream echoed throughout Egypt. In every Egyptian home, the firstborn lay dead. Pharaoh's own son was among the victims. Get out! Pharaoh shouted at Moses and Aaron, his face contorted with pain and terror. Get out, all of you. Take your flocks, your families, everything. Just go and serve your God as you said. And bless me too. The order spread like wildfire. We are free. Pharaoh has set us free. We leave now. Caleb ran home. Ephratah, wake the children. They're asking for everything they can carry. We're leaving immediately. Where are we going, Caleb? To the promised land, to freedom. The terrified Egyptian neighbors offered gold, silver, and clothing to the Hebrews. Take it, they begged. Take it all, but leave before we all die. As the immense crowd gathered to leave, Caleb helped the elderly and carried the children. His father-in-law, too weak to walk alone, leaned on his shoulder. I never thought I would live to see this day, the old man whispered, tears streaming down his weather-beaten face. The Lord has kept his promise, Caleb replied. 430 years of slavery have come to an end. As the sun rose, more than 2 million people were marching out of Egypt. Ahead, a pillar of cloud guided them. Caleb looked back one last time, seeing the pyramids he had helped build, disappearing into the horizon. "Goodbye, house of slavery," he murmured. "Hello, promise of God." Beside him, Ephrata squeezed his hand. "I'm scared, Caleb. What if Pharaoh changes his mind? What if we die in the desert?" Caleb stopped and looked into his wife's eyes. "Then we will die free. But I believe that the God who turned the Nile into blood and broke Pharaoh's pride did not bring us this far to abandon us. He has a purpose for us, Ephrathah, for our children, for all Israel." As they marched, the people began to sing, "The Lord is our strength and our song. He has become our salvation." Caleb joined the chorus, his heart overflowing with gratitude and anticipation. Little did he know that his journey was just beginning, and that the deserts ahead would test his faith in ways he could never have imagined. But at that moment, as the sun of a new day lit the path to freedom, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, marched with the certainty that the God of his fathers was faithful. And this certainty would be his strength in the 40 years of trials that lay ahead. Freedom had arrived. But with it would come challenges that would transform slaves into warriors, and Caleb would discover he possessed a different spirit, one that would set him apart from millions. The Sinai desert stretched out before them like a sea of golden sand. 2 years had passed since their exodus from Egypt, and Israel was camped at Kadesh Barnea on the edge of the Promised Land. The sacred mountain of Sinai, where they had received the law and built the tabernacle, was behind them. Now they were at the gates of their destiny. Moses summoned the leaders of the 12 tribes on a clear morning. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when Caleb, representing Judah, entered the tent of meeting. "The time has come," Moses announced, his eyes roving over every face. "The Lord has commanded us to send men to spy out the land of Canaan." "Finally," exclaimed Gadiel of the tribe of Zebulun, "2 years in the wilderness were enough." "I have chosen each of you," Moses continued, "because you are leaders in your tribes, men of courage and discernment. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, will represent Judah. Joshua, son of Nun, will represent Ephraim." Joshua and Caleb exchanged glances. They had become close friends during their journey, united by an unwavering faith. "What should we observe?" asked Shammua of the tribe of Reuben. "See what the land is like," Moses instructed. "Is it good or bad? What are the cities like? Are they camps or fortresses? Is the land fertile or barren? Are there trees or not? And be courageous. Bring some of the land's produce." Palti of the tribe of Benjamin whispered to his companion, "Brave against the giants that inhabit that land." "Giants?" Caleb scoffed. "Our God parted the Red Sea. Do you think he fears tall men?" The next morning, before leaving, Ephrath hugged Caleb tightly. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I will return with news of our inheritance," Caleb replied, kissing her forehead. "In 40 days at the most. Take care of our children. Tell them that their father went to see the land God promised us." The 12 spies set out at dawn. For 3 days they walked in silence through the desert until they saw the first vineyards of Canaan. That was when Gadi stopped abruptly. "By the gods," he muttered, and then corrected himself. "By the Lord, look at the size of those vines." Before them, gigantic vines stretched as far as the eye could see. The clusters of grapes hung heavy, each as tall as a squatting man. "I've never seen anything like it in Egypt," Amiel said, touching a single grape that barely fit in his hand. "This is what the Lord meant by a land flowing with milk and honey," Joshua declared, in wonder. But Setur, ever cautious, pointed to the horizon, and those walls, they seemed to touch the sky. The city of Hebron rose before them like a mountain built by human hands. Its walls were so thick that chariots could run over them. "We must go in," Caleb said. "We must see everything." "Are you crazy?" Igal protested. "If they find us, then—" "Let us be discreet," Caleb replied. "Let us divide into groups. Joshua and I will enter through this gate. You will enter through the others." Inside Hebron, the astonishment only grew. In the marketplace, Caleb and Joshua pretended to be merchants as they watched. A man walked past them, his head almost touching the second floors of the houses. "Anakim," whispered one local vendor to another. "Descendants of Anak, the giant. No one can stand against them in battle." Joshua squeezed Caleb's arm. "Did you see the size of his sword? It's bigger than a common man's." "I saw," Caleb replied calmly. "But remember Goliath of Egypt, who fell before the plagues. Size isn't everything." For 30 days, they explored the land. In each city, Jericho, Jerusalem, Gaza, they encountered the same sights: extraordinary fertility and daunting fortifications. In Eshcol, they discovered a valley where a single cluster of grapes had to be carried by 2 men on a pole. "Let's take this as proof," Caleb suggested. "No one will believe it without seeing it." "Proof of what?" Guel grumbled. "That the land is good or that it is impossible to conquer." On the return journey, the group was clearly divided. 10 of the spies murmured constantly about the dangers. Only Joshua and Caleb remained optimistic. "How can you smile?" Shammua confronted Caleb. "You saw those giants, those walls." "I have also seen the abundance God has prepared for us," Caleb replied. "Do you focus on the obstacle or the promise?" When they arrived at Kadesh Barnea, the entire camp gathered. Thousands of people crowded together to hear the report. The giant cluster of grapes was held aloft, causing gasps of astonishment. Moses raised his hands for silence. "Speak! What did you see on earth?" Shammua stepped forward. "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey." He pointed to the fruit. "This is its fruit." The people began to celebrate, but Shammua raised his hand. "But the people who live in that land are powerful. The cities are fortified and huge. We saw the sons of Anak there." A murmur of fear ran through the crowd. "Amalekites live in the Negev," Igal continued. "Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the mountains. Canaanites live by the sea. We are like grasshoppers before them," Guel shouted. "That is how we were in our own eyes, and that is how we were in their eyes." Panic began to spread. Women hugged their children, men murmured about returning to Egypt. It was then that Caleb climbed onto a rock, his voice cutting through the tumult like a sword. "Silence before Moses." When the crowd had quieted, Caleb continued, his voice strong and clear. "Let us go up at once and possess the land. We will surely prevail against it." "Shall we prevail?" Gadi scoffed. "Caleb, you saw what we saw. Those men are stronger." "No." Caleb turned to the people, his eyes blazing. "You're looking at things the wrong way. Yes, there are giants. Yes, there are walls. But there's also the God who drowned Pharaoh's army, the God who made water gush from the rock, the God who feeds us with manna from heaven." Joshua joined him. "Caleb speaks the truth. The land is extremely good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into it." But the other 10 spies insisted, "We cannot go up against those people," Palti declared. "They are stronger than us. The land is devouring its inhabitants." The crowd began to stir dangerously. Shouts of despair and rage filled the air. "We were fools to leave Egypt. Moses brought us here to die. Let's choose another leader and go back." Caleb tried to speak again, but now rocks began to fly toward him. He and Joshua tore their clothes in anguish. "Do not rebel against the Lord," Caleb shouted, dodging a stone. "Do not fear the people of the land. The Lord is with us." A voice in the crowd shouted, "Liar! You want our children to be killed by the giants." Ephrata managed to reach Caleb, tears on her face. "My love, is it true? Are they really giants?" Caleb held her face between his hands. "Yes, they are great, but our God is greater. If he promised this land to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, if he brought us out of Egypt to give us this inheritance, then we can conquer it. We just need to trust." The mob grew more violent. Moses and Aaron fell face down before the entire congregation. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting, a light so bright that everyone recoiled in terror. God's voice thundered, audible only to Moses, but the people saw the prophet conversing with the glorious cloud. Long minutes passed. When Moses finally turned to the people, his face was grave. "This is what the Lord says. Because of your unbelief, not one of you 20 years old or older will enter the promised land. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies explored the land. You will wander until this rebellious generation perishes." Cries of despair filled the air. But Moses continued, "Except Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. Because they had a different spirit and followed the Lord completely, they will enter the land." Caleb fell to his knees, torn between gratitude and sadness. Around him, the people mourned. The 10 unfaithful spies were suddenly struck down by a plague and died right there in front of everyone. That night, Caleb held his children close as the camp mourned. "Father," asked his eldest son, "why didn't the people believe?" "Because they saw with the eyes of flesh, not of faith," Caleb replied. "Always remember, the size of the giant doesn't matter when God is on our side. But now we have to wait 40 years. Caleb looked at the stars, the same ones God had shown to Abraham. If God promised, we can achieve it, even if it takes 40 years. Even if I'm old when the time comes, the promise remains." And as the desert fell silent around them, Caleb knew his greatest battle was just beginning. Darkness fell over the camp like a suffocating blanket, and Caleb watched from his tent as fear spread through the tents like wildfire. Through the canvas opening, he saw silhouettes running back and forth, mothers clutching children to their chests, men gesturing wildly. "Cursed be the hour we left Egypt," someone shouted in the shadows. Caleb's heart sank. 40 years walking with those people, seeing God work wonders, and still fear spoke louder than faith. "Caleb!" Joshua burst into his tent, his face pale in the flickering lamplight. "They're gathering. They're talking about stoning Moses." "And so do we," Caleb added, slowly getting up. "I was expecting that." The 2 men left together, walking between the tents as the clamor grew louder. Women sobbed in each other's arms. Children cried in fright, unable to understand the chaos gripping the adults. "Why have you brought us to die?" A shrill female voice cut through the night. "Our children will be prey, our women slaves." Caleb stopped in front of a family kneeling on the ground, the father shaking his head in despair as he repeated, "It would have been better to have died in Egypt. It would have been better to have died in Egypt." "Get up, Aminadab." Caleb touched the man's shoulder. "It was not to die that God brought us out of slavery." "God." Aminadab lifted his tear-streaked face, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "Where is this God now? You saw the giants, you saw the walls. We are locusts, Caleb, locusts. We are the Lord's people." Joshua intervened, his firm voice cutting through the desperation. "He promised this land. Promises!" Another man approached, fists clenched. "Promises don't defeat giants. Promises don't bring down walls." The crowd began to gather around them. Caleb could feel the tension rising, the fear turning to fury. Faces he had known for decades now stared at him with hostility. "Let's choose a leader and return to Egypt," someone shouted from the crowd. "Yes, yes," the chorus of approval echoed. "You fools!" Caleb climbed onto a rock so everyone could see him. "Have you forgotten the stripes, the chains? The blood of your children killed by the Egyptians?" "At least we had food there," a woman shouted. "At least we didn't face giants there. We had leeks and onions," another man scoffed bitterly. "And our children lived," Joshua tore his clothes, the dramatic gesture momentarily silencing the crowd. "How long will you test the Lord?" His voice thundered. "He opened the sea, he gave you manna, water from the rock, and you still doubt." "The sea will close in on us this time," someone murmured. "The giants will crush us." The night wore on, and with it, despair. Screams echoed from every direction. Children woke crying, frightened by the commotion. Dogs barked nervously. The entire camp seemed about to explode in violence. "Where is Moses?" an angry voice demanded. "Let him come and explain himself." "He's praying," Caleb replied, "as he always does when the people rebel." "Praying?" The man spat on the ground. "Let him pray in Egypt then." That's when Caleb saw the first stones being collected. Men bending down, filling their hands with missiles, a murderous gleam in their eyes. "Don't do this." Joshua stepped forward but was pushed back. "You want to hand us over to the Canaanites," accused an elder, lifting a stone. "You want to see our children dead." "We want to see them free," Caleb shouted. "Free in the land God promised." "Liars!" The first stone flew, narrowly missing Caleb. Then another and another. "Run!" Joshua pulled Caleb, but there was nowhere to run. The crowd surrounded them, faces distorted by fear and anger. Caleb closed his eyes, bracing for impact, when a sudden flash illuminated the camp. The stones stopped in midair, suspended. The crowd recoiled, gasping. "The glory!" Someone whispered. "The glory of the Lord." Above the tent of meeting, a supernatural light began to manifest. Caleb fell to his knees, as did Joshua. One by one, the rebels dropped their stones, terror replacing the fury on their faces. "What have we done?" A woman sobbed. "Oh God, what have we done?" Moses emerged from his tent, his face shining with reflections of divine light. Aaron stood beside him, both with grave expressions. "How long will these people provoke me?" The voice seemed to come from all directions at once. "How long will they not believe me?" The ground shook. Some fell prostrate, others ran to their tents. The crying was different now, no longer of rage, but of holy terror. Caleb kept his eyes closed, his heart pounding. He knew that voice, he knew that presence, and he knew judgment was near. "Forgive, Lord," Moses heard him plead. "Forgive, according to the greatness of your mercy." The stones that had been raised against the faithful now lay forgotten on the ground, silent witnesses to the rebellion that had nearly consumed the chosen people. Before we continue, we ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us keep sharing stories of faith like Caleb's, a man who saw the promised land when everyone else saw only desert and impossibilities. Now let's move forward to the moment when his courage placed him face to face with giants. The divine light pulsed over the camp like a heavenly heart, and Moses remained prostrate before the tent of meeting, his hands raised in desperate supplication. "Lord, if you destroy this people," his voice trembled, "the nations will. Say that you could not lead them to the promised land." Caleb watched in silence, still kneeling where the stones had fallen. Beside him, Joshua murmured prayers, his body trembling under the weight of the divine presence. "Forgive the iniquity of this people," Moses continued, "according to your great mercy, as you have forgiven from Egypt until now." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any thunder. Then the voice returned, each word falling like a hammer on an anvil. "I have forgiven according to your word, Moses. But as surely as I live, none of the men who saw my glory and my signs in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have tempted me these 10 times, will see the land I promised their fathers." A collective groan rippled through the camp. Women fell to their knees, men covered their faces. "For 40 days you explored the land," the divine voice continued, implacable. "For 40 years you will bear your iniquities, a year for each day. Your corpses will fall in this desert." "No," a man shouted, "we have children, innocent children." "Your children whom you said would be prey," the answer came like a blow. "I will bring into the land. They will know what you despised, but you will die here." Caleb felt tears burning his eyes. 40 years. All those people he knew, those he had seen delivered, would die in the wilderness. Except, the voice paused, and Caleb lifted his head. "Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun, because they followed the Lord fully, they will see the land." The weight of those words fell upon Caleb like a mountain. Salvation and condemnation intertwined. Life promised while death was decreed for all others. "Why?" Dathan stepped forward, his face contorted. "Why them and not us?" "Because when they saw giants," Moses replied, turning to face the people, "they saw God's promise. When you cried out that it was impossible, they declared that the Lord would give us victory." "So we'll die of fear," a woman sobbed. "Will our children be orphaned?" "You will die for unbelief," Aaron intervened, his voice heavy with sadness. "Fear was only the fruit. The root was lack of faith." Caleb couldn't take it anymore. He tore at his clothes violently, the fabric ripping with a sound that echoed in the night. "Lord," he cried, "let me die with them. They are my people. Be quiet, Caleb." Joshua grabbed his arm. "Do not insult the grace given you." "What fun is this?" Caleb turned to his friend, tears flowing freely. "To watch everyone I love die day after day, to walk over the bones of my brothers?" "The grace of fulfilling the purpose," Joshua replied, also weeping, "of leading the next generation to the promise." The 10 spies who had brought the bad report were called forward. Their faces were pale as wax. "You, the divine voice thundered specifically to them, who have caused the congregation to murmur, shall die even now by the plague before the Lord. Have mercy." Satur fell to his knees. "We were afraid. Fear," the answer came dryly, "cost the faith of thousands." Before everyone's eyes, the 10 men began to stagger. Their faces contorted in agony. One by one they fell, dead before their bodies hit the ground. Screams of horror filled the air. Some women fainted. Children hid behind their mothers. "Now you know," Moses told the stunned people, "that the word of the Lord does not return void. Prepare yourselves. Tomorrow we begin the 40-year journey." "No!" A group of men stepped forward. "We will go up now. We will conquer the land. We will show that we believe." "Too late." Moses shook his head. "The presence of the Lord will not go with you. If you go up now, you will die." "We'll try anyway," the group leader declared. "Better to die fighting than wandering." Caleb tried to stop them, but Joshua grabbed his arm. "Leave them alone," he whispered. "Each one chooses their own way of dying." The next morning, the rebel group ascended the mountain, swords drawn, war cries on their lips. Caleb watched them from the camp, his heart heavy. It didn't take long. The Amalekites and Canaanites descended on them like wolves on sheep. Their war cries turned to screams of agony. In less than an hour it was all over. "Fools," an elder beside Caleb muttered. "They thought they could force God's hand." "We are all fools," Caleb replied. Some more than others. The camp began to prepare for the long journey. Tents were dismantled. Herds gathered. The people moved like the living dead, the death sentence hanging over their heads. Caleb. A little girl tugged at his tunic. It was Axa, only 7 years old. Is it true that only you and Joshua will see the promised land? Caleb knelt before her, stroking her black hair. We and you, little one, all children, you will inherit what your parents rejected. But will Dad die? Caleb couldn't answer. He just hugged the child as she cried, as the sun set on that first day of exile. Caleb stood alone on a dune, watching the camp settle in for the night. 40 years old. He would be old when he finally set foot in the promised land, if he survived. Why me, Lord? He murmured to the wind. Why did you choose me to carry this burden? The wind didn't respond, but something inside him did. A certainty that didn't come from his own strength. A faith that didn't depend on circumstances. Joshua approached silently, sitting beside him. Are you thinking about giving up? Every day, Caleb confessed. But then I remember that he is faithful, even when we are not. 40 years is a long time. But it's not forever, Caleb replied. And we have a promise. Under the desert stars, 2 men sat in silence, bearing the weight of survival when everyone around them was doomed to fall. But their faith would sustain them where everyone else fell. The rising sun painted the tents blood red when the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed through the camp. Caleb woke with a start, immediately recognizing the sound, men readying weapons. You can't be serious, he muttered, rushing out of the tent. A crowd of warriors gathered in the center of the camp, strapping on armor, sharpening swords, and adjusting helmets. At their head, Hophni, one of the most respected captains, raised his spear. Brothers, his voice thundered, yesterday we were cowards, today we will be conquerors. Yes, the war cry echoed, we will take the land. Caleb made his way through the crowd until he reached Hophni. Have you lost your mind? The Lord said we wouldn't go up. The Lord said we would die in the wilderness, Hophni replied, his eyes shining with insane determination. I would rather die a warrior in Canaan than a worm in the sand. It's not about how you die, Joshua appeared, still wearing his nightclothes. It's about obeying. Obey? Hophni spat on the ground. Where was the obedience when you condemned us? We were just cowards, not traitors. Fear made. You traitors! Moses emerged from his tent, his face grim. And now pride will make you corpses. A tense silence fell over the group. Moses walked slowly among the armed men, his ancient eyes scanning each face. Do you see these weapons? He took a sword from a young man's hand. Without the Lord's blessing, they are but dead metal. Your arms, without his strength, they are dry twigs. We have 3,000 men, Hophni protested, trained warriors. You had the Red Sea before you. Moses returned the sword. Who opened it, your spears or God's staff? That was different. No, Hophni, it is exactly the same. Without him, you are nothing. A young warrior named Elias stepped forward, his chest puffed out. With all due respect, Moses, but you're old. We are the new generation. Our arms are strong. Your arms... Moses shook his head sadly. Poor fools. The ark will not go up with you. I will not go up. The Lord will not go up. You will go to your deaths alone. Then so be it. Hophni raised his spear again. Who is with me? The roar was deafening. Almost all 3,000 men shouted their approval. Please! Caleb tried one last time. Think of your wives, your children. We are thinking of them. Elijah replied. We want them to have a land, not a tomb in the desert. They will have only mourning, Joshua prophesied somberly, and tears, many tears. But it was useless. Pride had blinded the warriors. They marched, singing war songs, banners fluttering in the wind. Their wives ran alongside, begging. Children cried, clinging to their parents' legs, but nothing stopped them. "Shall we go with them?" a young man asked Caleb. "For what? To die without purpose?" Caleb replied bitterly, "Stay, someone will need to bury the bodies." From atop a hill, Caleb, Joshua, and Moses watched the march. 3,000 men ascending the mountains, the sun reflecting off their armor like earthly stars. "They are brave," Josue admitted. "Bravery without wisdom is just an elaborate form of suicide," Moses replied. They didn't have to wait long. As soon as the Israelites reached the first pass, arrows began raining down from above. The Amalekites and Canaanites were waiting for them, ambush. The scream echoed all the way to where they were. "Formation!" Hophni's voice tried to organize the defense. "Shields up!" But it was too late. The enemy descended from the mountains like an avalanche. They had the advantage of terrain, numbers, and most importantly, they had the absence of God on the Israelite side. "I can't." "See?" The young man next to Caleb craned his neck. "What's going on?" "Death," Caleb replied dryly. "Death is happening." The war cries turned into screams of agony. What should have been a conquest became a massacre. Israelites fell like harvested wheat. Some tried to flee but were shot from behind. "There," Joshua pointed. "Hophni." The captain fought fiercely, his spear spinning in deadly arcs. 3 Canaanites fell before him, but then an arrow found his neck. He fell to his knees, his hands trying to staunch the bleeding. "No!" a woman shouted from the camp. It was his wife watching from afar. Elijah, the arrogant young man, tried to rally the survivors. "For me! For me! Retreat in order!" But there was no order, only chaos and death. A spear pierced his chest. He looked down in surprise, as if he couldn't believe he could die. He fell face down on the land he had so longed to conquer. In less than 2 hours, it was over. Where 3,000 men had marched proudly, there was now only a field of corpses. A few survivors ran back, wounded, broken, defeated. "Help us!" they shouted as they approached the camp. "For pity's sake, help us!" Women rushed to meet them, searching for husbands who would never return. The sound of their wailing when they found only strange survivors was heartbreaking. "Where's my father?" A boy tugged at a survivor's tunic. "Where's Hophni?" The man just shook his head, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "Moses was right," he murmured. "We were nothing without God." One of the survivors, limping with an arrow still lodged in his thigh, approached Moses and fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me, prophet. We were foolish." "Forgiveness will not bring back the dead," Moses replied, but there was compassion in his voice. "But perhaps it will bring wisdom to the living." As the sun set, the camp became a place of mourning. Widows tore their clothes. Orphans wept inconsolably. The few remaining men dug graves for the few bodies they could rescue. 3,000 men, Caleb murmured to Joshua. "In one morning, 3,000 men. "Pride has killed more than enemy swords," Joshua replied. An elderly woman approached them, her face streaked with tears. "I lost 3 sons today," he said simply. 3. I warned them not to go. I begged them, but they said I didn't understand war." "Ma'am, Caleb began, but she interrupted him. "No," he raised his hand. "I don't want comfort. I want you to remember. When you reach the promised land, remember those who fell because they didn't wait for God's timing." She walked away, hunched over, with the weight of pain. That night, no one slept. The sound of lamentation echoed across the desert like the howling of wounded wolves. Fires burned not for warmth, but to mourn the dead. Lord, Caleb prayed silently, how much more blood will be shed before we learn? High on a dune, a lone figure stood watching. It was one of the young men who had lost his father in the battle. In his hands, Hophni's broken sword. I swear, he murmured to the wind, that when my children ask about this day, I will tell them the truth. That pride without God is the quickest path to the grave. The desert was filled with mourning and silence. The stars circled slowly over the desert, marking the passing of another dry season. Caleb counted the constellations like one counting scars. Each one marked another year in exile, another group of acquaintances buried in the endless sand. Grandpa, Caleb, a childish voice pulled him from his thoughts. Tell me again what Egypt was like. It was Othniel, an 8-year-old boy born in the desert and never seen brick walls. Around him other children gathered, their eyes shining with curiosity. Egypt, Caleb smiled, stroking his beard, now streaked with white. There were pyramids that touched the clouds and the Nile River that turned the desert green. And we were slaves? Asked a girl, Deborah. We were, but God freed us with a mighty hand. Then why are we here? Othniel frowned. Why not in the land he promised? Caleb looked at the horizon where the sun was rising, dyeing the dunes gold. Because your parents were afraid, and fear made them disobey. But we are not afraid. Othniel stood up, fist in the air. When we grow up, we will conquer the whole earth. Yes, the other children shouted in chorus. Across the camp, the familiar sound echoed. The call to gather the manna. Caleb stood, his joints protesting more than they had years ago. Come, he said to the children, see the daily miracle that your parents no longer even notice. They walked between the tents where the morning dew revealed the bread of heaven, small white grains like frost covering the ground around the camp. Every day, Deborah asked in wonder, does it fall from the sky every day? 23 years, Caleb confirmed. It's never failed, not even a single day. Miracle, whispered a bitter voice behind them. It was Korah, a middle-aged man. Prison, that's what it is. We eat the same thing day after day while we rot in the desert. Would you prefer the whips of Egypt? Caleb replied calmly. I preferred the dignity of a quick death to the humiliation of a slow one. Korah spat and walked away. Why is he so sad? Othniel asked. Because he lost 3 brothers in the rebellion of the mountains, Caleb explained. Bitterness ate at his heart. Later, when the sun was high and merciless, the camp faced another challenge. The water had run out again. The well they had dug had dried up overnight. Moses! Voices rose in protest. Give us water, or we will die. Caleb watched as the old prophet, now bent with age, walked slowly to a rock at the edge of the camp. Aaron followed him, both of them with weary faces from decades of hearing the same complaints. Watch carefully, children. Caleb whispered to the group following him. You will see the power of God. Moses raised his staff. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with strength surprising for his age, he struck the rock. The sound was like thunder. The rock split and water gushed out, clear, fresh, abundant. People rushed forward with jars and water skins, some falling to their knees to drink directly from the new spring. What? Othniel was open-mouthed. Ask not how. Joshua appeared beside them. Ask why. Why does God still care for a rebellious people? Because he is faithful, Caleb replied, even when we are not. The years continued their inexorable march. Caleb established a routine. Every afternoon he gathered the young men for training. Not just combat, but discipline, faith, history. Raise your shield higher, Othniel, he instructed during a session. The enemy won't wait for you to be ready. Yes, master. The boy, now 12 years old, adjusted his posture. Why do you train us? Asked Bezalel, another young man. If we are going to die in the desert like our fathers. You will not die here, Caleb replied firmly. You will cross the Jordan. You will take Jericho. You will inherit the promise. How can you be so sure, Deborah, now a young woman asked? Because God promised, and I learned that his promises are more solid than mountains. One afternoon, while supervising the training, Caleb noticed an old man sitting on a nearby rock, watching. It was Jephthah, one of the few survivors of the massacre in the mountains years before. You're wasting your time, Caleb, said the old man. They're children of the desert. What do they know about war? You know what I teach you, Caleb replied. Discipline, faith, courage. Courage. Jephthah laughed bitterly. I had courage. My brothers had courage. Where are they now? They were proud, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. Courage trusts in God. Pride trusts in itself. Jephthah stood silently, watching the young men train. Finally, he struggled to his feet. Maybe you're right. Can I help with the training? It would be an honor. Caleb extended his hand. The broken old warrior smiled for the first time in years. The seasons kept turning. More old people died. More young people grew. The manna kept falling. The water kept flowing when needed. Particularly clear night, Caleb sat with Joshua on top of a dune, watching the camp sleep. How many years have passed? Joshua asked. 32, Caleb replied. 8 to make the 40. Sometimes I think we will die before we see the promise. No, Caleb shook his head. He promised. We will live to set foot in that land. Does your faith never waver every day? Caleb admitted. But then I remember the Red Sea parting, Sinai burning, the manna that never runs out. How can I doubt a God who does that? And the young men? Joshua gestured to the camp. Do you think they're ready? More ready than we were, Caleb smiled. They were born free. They never knew chains. The desert forged them hard as bronze. And you seasoned them with wisdom. I did what I could. The rest. Caleb looked at the stars. The rest is in his hands. A gentle breeze blew, bringing the scent of distant acacia trees. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. The sound of a lone flute echoed between the tents. You know, Joshua said softly, sometimes I see my reflection in the water and don't recognize the old man staring back at me. The desert has changed us, Caleb. It has changed, Caleb. Agreed, but not our essence. We are still the men who believed we could take Canaan. Only now we know it won't be by our strength. It will be by his strength, as it always was. It just took us 40 years to learn. Below in the camp, Othniel practiced swordplay alone in the moonlight. The young man didn't know it, but within a few years he would become one of Israel's greatest warriors. For now he was just a desert boy, trained by an old man whose faith refused to age. Look, Joshua pointed, another one practicing at night. They are dedicated. Caleb observed with fatherly pride. This generation is different, Joshua. They will achieve what we failed to achieve. Because they had good teachers, because they were born in the furnace, Caleb corrected. The desert burned away all the dross. What's left is pure gold. The years passed, but his faith did not grow old. The sandstorm swept through the camp like the hand of death itself, and Caleb walked among the mounds that marked the fresh graves, his cloak whipping violently against his body. Each mound was a story interrupted, a rebellion paid for in blood. Caleb, a faint voice called through the wind. Please, it was Nadab, one of the last of the old generation, lying in a makeshift tent. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, as if he knew his time had come. "I'm here, old friend." Caleb knelt beside him, holding his trembling hand. How many? How many are gone? Caleb didn't need to tell. He knew it by heart. Almost all of us. There are only a few dozen of us left who left Egypt as adults. And you and Joshua. Nadab coughed, bloodstains appearing on the cloth he held to his mouth. "You will live to see—" "Yes," Caleb confirmed softly. "We will see the land." "Unfair," Nadab murmured, but without anger, just resignation. "We walk together." "Why you and not us?" "Because when it came time to choose between faith and fear, we chose differently." Nadab closed his eyes, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. "My son, Elisha, promise you'll take care of him? As if it were my own blood." Caleb squeezed the dying man's hand. "There were so many of us." Nadab's voice was growing fainter. 600,000 men left Egypt. Now we are dust. Your children will live. Caleb tried to comfort him. The promise will pass to them. But we who saw the miracles, who ate the Passover lamb, who crossed the sea. Nadab opened his eyes one last time. We will die without touching the promise. His chest rose one last time, then silence. Caleb gently closed his friend's eyes and left the tent. Outside, Elisha waited, his young face etched with the pain of impending loss. "Is it over?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "Yes, your father rests now." "Rest," Elisha laughed bitterly. "In the desert, like all the others." "Elisha." "No!" the young man exploded. "I'm tired of consolations, tired of promises. My father died believing in a land he never saw. And you will see it through him," Caleb answered firmly. "So what?" Tears streamed down Elisha's face. "He won't be there to see it. None of them." "Will be." The storm intensified, forcing them to seek shelter. But even within their tents, the sound of the wind was reminiscent of wailing, as if the desert itself were weeping for the dead. Later, when the storm had passed, Caleb helped dig another grave. The sand was heavy, wet with morning dew. Around him, others were doing the same, the macabre ritual that had become routine. "Do you remember Zur?" Joshua appeared beside him, helping to dig. "He died last night." "Zur?" Caleb paused. "The baker?" "Yes, the one who always complained that the manna had no taste at all." "Now you don't have to worry about the taste anymore," Caleb replied dryly, then regretted the comment. "Forgive me. Constant death has made me insensitive." "To all of us," Joshua agreed. "Sometimes I think a part of us dies with each of them." As they laid Nadab's body in the shallow grave, others approached. Moses' sister Miriam, now a bent old woman, began to sing the funeral dirge. "O sons of Jacob, why did you despise your inheritance? Why did you exchange the promise for fear? Your bones will whiten under the merciless sun. Your name will be remembered as a warning." "Enough," a woman shouted. "Enough of this whining. We're tired of hearing about our failure." It was Abigail, who had lost her husband the month before and 2 children years before. "Do you want us to sing joy while we bury our dead?" Miriam replied. "I want silence." Abigail fell to her knees. "Just silence." Caleb helped her up. She stared at him with empty eyes. "How can you bear it, Caleb? To see everyone die while you remain?" "It's not easy," he admitted. "Every face that goes takes a piece of me with it." "Then why does God spare you, so that you suffer more?" "To fulfill his promise," Caleb replied, "and to ensure that your children do not forget." "Forget?" She laughed hysterically. "How can I forget? The desert is full of our dead. Dune hides a tomb." It was true. After 35 years of wandering, the desert had become a vast cemetery. Sometimes, as they dug new campsites, they found the bones of former companions. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He went out to walk among the silent tents. How many familiar faces had disappeared? How many voices had been silenced? He found Moses sitting on a rock looking at the stars. "Can't you sleep either?" the prophet asked. "The dead won't leave me," Caleb confessed. "They visit me too," Moses sighed. "Every single one of them. I wonder if I could have done things differently, if I could have convinced them to trust." "You did everything you could. It was their choice." Still, Moses paused. "I feel the weight of every life lost." "How many are left?" Caleb asked. "Of those who came out of Egypt as adults?" "Less than 100, Moses replied. "And with each full moon, there are fewer." "Sometimes I feel like a ghost," Caleb confessed, "wandering among the living but belonging to the dead." "No," Moses touched his shoulder. "You belong to the future. You and Joshua are the bridge between what was and what will be." A scream cut through the night, another person leaving. Always in the middle of the night, as if death preferred the shadows. "I'll see who it is." Caleb stood up. It was Amminadab, the same man who years before had said he preferred death in Egypt. Ironic, he met his death in the desert. His son, a young man named Nahum, held his father's body rocking back and forth. "He just wanted to see the land," she sobbed. "In the last few days he was delirious. He said he could see Hebron in the distance, the vineyards of Eshcol." "Perhaps he did," Caleb said gently. "Perhaps God showed in mercy what he denied in justice." "Mercy?" Nahum raised his red eyes. "Where is the mercy in dying days before the promise? It's still years away, boy, not days, but he didn't know that. He died hopeful. Then he died better than many," Caleb replied. The sun was rising as they finished burying Amminadab. Caleb was exhausted, covered in sand and sweat. But as he walked back to his tent, he saw the children waking up, running too. Play, laughing, the new generation, without the scars of Egypt, without the weight of fear, free. "Grandpa Caleb." Othniel ran to him. "Shall we train today?" "Yes," Caleb smiled, for the first time in days. "We'll train today." What was that noise at night? "Nothing to worry about." Caleb ruffled the boy's hair. "Go ahead, get your wooden sword ready." As he watched the boy run, Caleb felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just memory or nostalgia. It was the promise, still alive, still burning, still pulsing through his veins like sacred fire. The dead rested beneath the sand, but the promise still burned like fire in his chest. The Jordan River roared ahead like a liquid serpent, its turbulent waters marking the boundary between 40 years of exile and the long-awaited promise. Caleb stood on the bank, his feet sinking into the mud, his heart pounding like it hadn't in decades. "It's bigger than I imagined." Othniel, now a grown man, stopped beside him. "In flood season, yes," Caleb replied, watching the violent current. "God always chooses the most impossible moment to display his power." Joshua approached, wearing the robes of leader he had inherited from Moses. The weight of responsibility was visible on his shoulders, but his eyes shone with determination. "Are the people ready?" he asked Caleb. "More ready than we've ever been," Caleb replied. "This generation doesn't know the fear that paralyzed their fathers." "Commander!" a young warrior ran up to them. "The priests ask when they should raise the ark." "Now," Joshua replied. "God said that when the priests' feet touch the waters, they will part." "Like the Red Sea?" the young man asked. In wonder. "Similar," Caleb smiled. "But every miracle of God is unique. The priests emerged from the ranks, carrying the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders. Their faces showed a mixture of reverence and anxiety. The first of them, Eleazar, son of Aaron, stepped forward. "Do you trust my word, Joshua?" he asked, looking at the turbulent waters. "I trust," Joshua replied firmly. "And you?" "My father saw the sea part." Eleazar straightened his shoulders. "I will see the river bend." The priests began walking. Each step toward the water was watched by thousands of eyes. Mothers held their children in their arms so they could see. Warriors held their breath. "Look!" Deborah, now a grown woman, pointed. "Their feet!" The moment the priests' feet touched the water's edge, something extraordinary happened. The waters began to recede, not gradually, but as if held back by an invisible wall. "Impossible," someone murmured. "No," Caleb replied loudly for everyone to hear. "With God, nothing is impossible." The waters continued to recede, piling upstream like a liquid mountain suspended in midair. The riverbed was revealed, smooth rocks, wet sand, small struggling fish. "Advance," Joshua commanded, "but keep your distance from the ark." The people began to cross, at first hesitantly, then with growing confidence. Children ran in wonder, touching the ground that had been submerged moments before. Elderly people wept, openly seeing the promise fulfilled. "Caleb," a familiar voice called. It was Jephthah, the old warrior who had survived the massacre in the mountains. "We lived to see this day." "We lived," Caleb hugged his friend, "against all odds." "My children will cross over to the promised land," Jephthah wept shamelessly. "My grandchildren will know true freedom." As they crossed, Caleb noticed a family standing in the middle of the dry riverbed, the father kneeling with his children. "What are you doing?" Caleb approached. "I pray," the man replied. "And I teach my children to remember. This ground where we knelt was covered in waters impossible to cross, but God opened a way." The youngest son added, "Exactly, my son. He always makes way." The priests stood motionless in the middle of the bed, the ark on their shoulders, the waters dammed up behind them like a wall of glass. Caleb stopped as he passed them. "Tired?" he asked Eleazar. "Honored," the priest replied. "My father carried this ark in the desert for 40 years. Today I carry it for the promise. Your father would be proud." "He is," Eleazar smiled. "I can feel him." When the last Israelite crossed, Joshua gave another order. 12 men, one from each tribe. Get stones from the middle of the river. Caleb was chosen by Judah. He bent down and selected a large, smooth stone, still wet. Others did the same. "For what?" Othniel asked. "Memorial," Joshua explained. "When your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' you shall say, 'Here the Jordan stopped before the ark of the Lord.'" They piled the stones on the west bank, creating a makeshift altar. Then Joshua did something unexpected. He took 12 more stones from the bank and placed them in the middle of the river where the priests were standing. "These will remain submerged," he said. "A hidden memorial, known only to God and us." When the priests finally emerged from the riverbed, the waters returned with thunderous force, instantly covering the path they had traversed. "It's over," someone whispered. "There's no going back." "We don't need to go back," Caleb replied. "Just go forward." They camped at Gilgal, a few miles from Jericho. For the first time in 40 years, they were camped in the promised land. The ground beneath their feet was no longer desert sand, but fertile soil. "How does it feel?" Joshua asked Caleb as they watched the sunset. "Surreal," Caleb confessed, taking off his sandals to feel the earth between his toes. 40 years dreaming of this moment, and it still feels like a dream. It's not, Joshua pointed out. Look. On the horizon, the walls of Jericho rose like man-made mountains. Watchtowers, bronze gates, fortifications that seemed impenetrable. Our first challenge, Caleb observed. Do you remember what the spies said? Joshua asked. Walled cities up to the sky? I remember. But I also remember that we said we could take them. And now we will have to prove it. That night the camp was in a festive mood. Instruments were playing, people were dancing, children were running around excitedly. After 4 decades, they were finally home, or at least in her backyard. Grandpa Caleb, a little girl, tugged at his tunic. It was Jephthah's granddaughter. Is it true we're going to conquer that big city? It's true. Caleb picked her. Oh, but the walls are so high. They were, Caleb smiled. But did you see what God did with the river? He stopped the waters. If he can stop water, what do you think he can do with walls? The girl thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. Tear them down. Exactly. Later, alone in his tent, Caleb unrolled an old, worn map. It was the same one he had made 40 years earlier when he had explored the land. His fingers traced the path to Hebron. Soon, he murmured, I will win you over soon, as I promised. Caleb, Joshua entered. The commanders are assembled. We need to plan the siege of Jericho. Siege. Caleb rolled up the map. Do you think God brought us here for a common siege? What do you mean? Think, Joshua. He parted the sea. He stopped the river. Do you think stone walls will stop him? So what do you suggest? Let us wait, Caleb replied. And let us listen. God did not bring us this far to fail in the first city. Joshua nodded slowly. You're right. I'll pray tonight. When Joshua left, Caleb looked at the map again. His eyes fixed on Jericho, then Hebron, then the entire promised territory. Outside, he could hear the sentries shouting the night shifts. The sound was different now, no longer the sound of exiles guarding a temporary camp, but of conquerors protecting their first foothold in the promised land. But Jericho raised its walls as an insurmountable challenge. The sentries of Jericho laughed from atop the walls as they watched the strange ritual below. For the 6th day in a row, the Israelites marched in silence around the city, priests carrying the ark, others blowing ram's horns. Look at those fools. A Canaanite soldier shouted. They think they can bring down our walls on foot. Caleb marched in formation, biting his tongue to keep from answering. Beside him, Othniel whispered, How much longer will we do this? Our enemies mock us. Until God says enough, Caleb replied quietly. Obedience comes before victory. Joshua led the procession, his face a mask of determination. The night before, he had gathered the leaders to explain the divine instructions, so strange that some questioned whether he had heard correctly. 6 days of marching in silence. Simeon, the leader of his tribe, had murmured. Then 7. Lapse on the 7th day and then shout, exactly as he commanded. Joshua had confirmed, and the walls will simply fall. Do you have any questions? Caleb interjected. You saw the Jordan split. Why would the walls be different? Now, completing the 6th circuit of the 6th day, they returned to camp amid jeers and insults from the defenders of Jericho. Go back to the desert, slaves! Someone shouted from above. Your God is weak, another mocked. You don't even know how to build siege ladders. That night, Joshua gathered the entire camp together. Tomorrow, his voice echoed clearly, is the day. We will march 7 times. On the 7th, when the trumpets sound a long blast, everyone will shout, and the walls will fall. Everyone? A woman asked. Even the children? Everyone who has a voice, Joshua confirmed. This is no ordinary battle cry. It is a cry of faith. And then, Jephthah asked, When the walls fall, the city will be devoted to the Lord, Joshua replied gravely. You will take nothing for yourselves. Everything will be destroyed except Rahab and her family. Rahab? Someone asked. The prostitute? The woman who hid our spies, Caleb corrected firmly. Who recognized the power of our God when her own people despised him. The morning of the seventh day arrived shrouded in mist. The camp awoke before the sun, an electric energy coursing through the ranks. Children were instructed, weapons prepared, hearts strengthened. Remember, Joshua instructed the captains, absolute silence until my signal. No whispers. The first round began as the sun touched the walls. Jericho's defenders, initially surprised by the early activity, soon resumed their jeering. You got up early today, they laughed. Eager for more humiliation? Second round. Third. The sun rose. The heat increased. On the walls, some defenders began to grow restless. Why 7 laps today? Caleb heard one ask the other. What difference does it make? Was the reply. Fools remain fools. Fourth round. Fifth. Now even the mockers had fallen silent, watching. With growing apprehension, something was different. The Israelites' silence was oppressive, unearthly. Caleb, Eleazar whispered as he carried the ark, do you feel it? Yes, Caleb replied. The air is heavy with his presence. Sixth lap. Many people's legs trembled with exhaustion, but no one stopped. On the walls, the king of Jericho appeared, his face pale despite the royal makeup. What are they? A doing, he asked his general. I don't know, your majesty, but the general swallowed hard. Our men are nervous. Nervous? The king forced a laugh. Of silent walkers. There's something unnatural about this, the general confessed. 7th lap. When they completed the circuit, Josue stopped. He raised his hand. The silence was absolute. Not even the children cried, not even the animals made a sound. The trumpet sounded, not the short blast of the previous days, but a long, piercing sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Now! Joshua shouted. Shout to the Lord! The cry that followed was like nothing Caleb had ever heard. 600,000 voices raised in unison, men, women, children, all screaming with every fiber of their being. It was not a war cry. It was a cry of faith, of liberation, of 40 years of waiting exploding into sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the first crack. A crack appeared at the base of the north wall, then another in the south wall. The defenders began to scream in panic. The walls! Someone shouted. The walls are... The rest was swallowed by the roar. As if giant hands were pushing against them, the walls of Jericho collapsed. Not inward or outward, but straight down, as if the earth itself was swallowing them. Dust rose in immense clouds. Rocks rolled. Screams of terror echoed. Advance, Joshua commanded. The city is ours. The Israelites clambered over the rubble, finding defenders too stunned to resist. Some Canaanites fell to their knees, dropping their weapons. Forgive me, they begged. Your God is true. Too late, they replied. You've had 40 years of warning. Caleb led his platoon through the northern breach. Among the rubble, he found the general of Jericho, trapped under a beam. Kill me, the general demanded, but quickly. Did you know our God? Caleb asked. Did you hear about Egypt, the Red Sea? Yes. The general coughed up blood. We all heard. But we think our walls cannot stop the Creator. Caleb raised his sword. Let this be a lesson to all who oppose him. The blow was merciful and precise. In another part of the city, Othniel found the temple of Baal. The pagan priests were kneeling before the idol, begging for protection. Where is your God now? Othniel asked. One of the priests looked up, tears in his eyes. "We always knew," he confessed. "We always knew your God was real, but pride, damned pride." The battle, if it could be called that, ended before noon. Only one house remained standing. Rahab's marked with the scarlet cord. "Rahab," Joshua called, "come out with your family." The woman emerged, carrying elderly parents, siblings, and nephews. Her eyes were wide with wonder and terror. "The walls," she murmured. "They just fell down." "As we promised," Caleb said gently, "you were spared because of your faith." "I don't deserve it. None of us deserves it," Joshua interrupted. "But God is merciful to those who acknowledge him." As the city burned behind them, the Israeli army returned. To camp, some wore expressions of shock, others of awe. All understood they had witnessed something beyond the natural. Caleb, a young soldier, approached, his face pale. "If God can do this with stone walls—" "Yes?" Caleb encouraged. "The giants, the Anakims your spies saw, they are flesh and blood." Caleb smiled grimly. "And flesh and blood are no match for the God who brings down mountains." That night, while the flames of Jericho still lit the sky, Joshua gathered the leaders together. "This was just the first," he said. "There are many cities ahead, and not all of them will fall with a scream. But they will all fall," Caleb stated, "because the Lord promised." "The kings of Canaan must already know," Simeon observed. "News travels fast." "Let them know," Joshua replied. "Let them tremble. Let them understand that they are not fighting against men, but against the living God." From atop a hill, Caleb watched the coals of Jericho. Behind him, Othniel approached. "Are you thinking of Hebron?" the young man asked. "Always," Caleb admitted. "That's where the giants are, the sons of Anak." "Are you afraid?" Caleb turned, his eyes shining with iron determination. "Fear? Boy, I've waited 40 years for this fight. If rocks fall, who will stop the giants?" The messenger arrived at the camp, covered in blood and dust, barely able to stand. Caleb was the first to reach him, catching him before he fell. "What happened?" he demanded. "Where are the others?" "Dead. Fleeing," the young warrior gasped. "Oh, they massacred us." "Impossible!" Othniel exclaimed from nearby. "It's a small town. We sent 3,000 men." The messenger began to cry, a broken sound that made Caleb's blood run cold. "They chased us, killed 36. The rest fled." "I have never seen such a defeat." Joshua emerged from his tent, his face turning from confidence to horror as he heard the words. "Defeat?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign. How were we defeated?" Soon the survivors began to arrive, strong men reduced to trembling shadows, some weaponless, others supporting wounded comrades. The entire camp came out to see them, and a murmur of terror ran through the crowd. "Look at them," a woman shouted. "They look like the ones who came back from the massacre in the mountains years ago. Where is God's power now?" Another asked. Caleb found Silas, one of the expedition's commanders, sitting on a rock with his head in his hands. "Tell me everything," he ordered. Silas looked up, and Caleb saw something he hadn't seen in an Israelite warrior's eyes for 40 years, pure terror. "We climbed up confidently," Silas began, his voice trembling. "After Jericho, we thought it would be easy. There are at most 2,000 inhabitants there. But when we reached the gates—" "What?" Caleb pressed. "It was as if an invisible force pushed us back. Our arms went weak, our legs shook. The men of Ai came out and Silas swallowed hard. And chased us like dogs chasing sheep. 3,000 warriors fled from a small garrison? You don't understand. Silas grabbed Caleb's arm. We weren't ourselves. It was as if God, as if he had abandoned us. Joshua, hearing this, tore his clothes violently. He took ashes from the nearest fire and poured them on his head, falling to his knees. Why, Lord? He cried to the heavens, why have you forsaken us? It would have been better for us to have stayed beyond the Jordan. Joshua, Caleb tried to lift him up. Don't talk like that. Don't you see? Joshua pushed him away. The Canaanites will hear. They will know we have been defeated. They will come upon us like wolves. What will become of your great name? The elders gathered, all with ashes on their heads, prostrated before the tent of meeting. The sound of wailing filled the camp. Mothers hugged their children, fearing the impending slaughter. We are lost, Jephthah murmured beside Caleb. If a small city defeated us, what will the big ones do? Something is wrong, Caleb replied, surveying the scene. God wouldn't bring us this far and then abandon us. There's something we don't know. Evening turned to night, and still Joshua lay prostrate. The army, what was left of, it was in tears. Grown men wept like children, the trust they had gained at Jericho evaporating like dew in the sun. It was then that Caleb noticed something strange. Haggai, one of the soldiers from the tribe of Judah, was in his tent, not among the mourners. He approached silently. Haggai, why aren't you with the others? Haggai started, turning quickly. His eyes were red, but not from crying, from fear. I was praying alone, he stammered. Praying? Caleb narrowed his eyes. Or hiding? I don't know what you're talking about. Achan backed away. Before Caleb could press further, a supernatural light began to emanate from the tent of meeting. Joshua stood up abruptly, as if pulled by invisible hands. The Lord has spoken, he announced, his voice piercing through the wailing. Israel has sinned. They have taken what was devoted. They have stolen and lied. A deathly silence fell over the camp. Who? Someone asked. Who would dare? Tomorrow we will know, Joshua replied somberly. Sanctify yourselves. The Lord will reveal the guilty, and until the sin is removed, we will not be able to defeat our enemies. Caleb looked again at Achan, who had visibly paled. His suspicions were confirmed, but he would wait for divine revelation. That night no one slept. Fear hung over the camp like a dark cloud. Whispered conversations speculated about the culprit. It must be someone from the Jericho expedition, they said. But what would they have taken, he wondered. Gold? Silver? Is the blood of 36 men worth any treasure? A recent widow asked bitterly. Caleb found Othniel obsessively sharpening his sword. Are you nervous? He asked the young man. Confused, Othniel admitted. How can one man put all Israel in danger for greed? Sin blinds, Caleb replied. It makes what is great seem small, and what is worthless seem great. If we find the culprit, when we find it, Caleb corrected. God doesn't lie. What will happen to him? Caleb didn't answer. They both knew the answer. By dawn, all Israel had gathered by tribe. The tension was palpable as Joshua began the divine selection process. The tribe of Judah, he announced after casting the lots. Caleb's heart sank. His own tribe, family by family they were called, until only the clan of Zerah remained. Then, man by man, until Achan stood alone before them all, trembling like a rod in the wind. My son, Joshua said gently, give glory to the Lord, confess what you have done. Achan fell to his knees, sobbing, I have sinned against the Lord. I saw in Jericho a beautiful Babylonian cloak, 200 shekels of silver, a bar of gold. I coveted them. I took them. They are buried in my tent." Shouts of rage erupted from the crowd. Some picked up rocks. "Because of your greed, men died," the widow cried. "My husband died." "Sorry," Achan begged. "I didn't know. I didn't think." "Didn't you think?" Caleb stepped forward, his voice thundering. "Didn't you think that disobeying God would have consequences? Didn't you think about your brothers who would die for your sin?" The objects were found exactly where Achan had said. The beautiful robe, the silver, the gold, stained now with the invisible blood of 36 men. Valley of disaster. Joshua named the place where Achan and his entire family were stoned and burned. Let it be an eternal memorial of the price of disobedience. After the execution, a heavy silence fell over the camp, but something had changed. The oppressive weight began to lift. "Now," Joshua announced, "we will return to Ai, and this time the Lord will be with us." "But they defeated us once," someone protested. "They'll be confident. Their confidence will be their downfall," Joshua replied. "As it was ours." Caleb watched the preparations for the new attack, but his mind was elsewhere. If a single act of disobedience had nearly destroyed them, what else could be hidden among them? Thoughtful. Joshua approached. "Worried," Caleb admitted. "If a small town defeated us because of one sin." Trying. Caleb looked toward Hebron, invisible beyond the mountains. What will become of Hebron, where the giants wait if we are not completely clean before God? The valley was utterly silent as Achan and his family were brought in. Not even the birds dared sing. Caleb stood in the front row, his heart heavy as stone as he watched the procession of death approach. "Please!" Achan's wife cried, holding her 2 small children. "The children didn't know. I didn't know." Achan walked ahead, his shoulders hunched under the weight of guilt. His eyes met Caleb's for a moment, and in them was an emptiness that transcended fear, the emptiness of a man who understood too late the price of his choice. "Caleb," Othniel whispered beside him, "the children too?" "The leprosy of sin contaminates the whole house," Caleb replied, though the words burned his throat. "If a root of rebellion remains, it will grow again." Joshua stood in the center of the valley, his face a mask of necessary pain. When Achan came before him, the leader of Israel spoke in a voice that echoed across the hills. "Achan, son of Carmi, your sin has brought disaster upon Israel. 36 men lie dead because of your greed. Do you have anything to say before the judgment?" Achan lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. I was a poor man all my life. In Egypt we were slaves. In the desert we had only... When I saw that cloak," his voice broke, "it was so beautiful. I thought, just once I want to have something beautiful. Just once. Once was enough to destroy everything," a voice shouted from the crowd. It was Nathan, who had lost a brother at Ai. "My brother died for your beautiful cloak." "I know." Achan fell to his knees. "I know, and the guilt consumes me. But my family," he turned to Joshua, "for pity's sake, spare my family." "Did your sons see where you hid the treasure?" Joshua asked. Achan's silence was answer enough. "Then they were accomplices," Joshua said. "The judgment is sealed." That's when Achan's eldest daughter, a young girl of perhaps 15, stepped forward. "I begged him to give it back," she screamed. "I said God would see. But he said God had bigger things to worry about." "Appa!" Murmur of horror ran through the crowd. Knowingly defying God was even worse than stealing. "Do you see, Achan?" Joshua said sadly. "Your sin has taught your children that God can be ignored. What greater poison could you have given them?" Caleb closed his eyes, remembering all the young men he had trained in the wilderness. How many times had he emphasized that obedience to God was more precious than gold? "Begin," Joshua ordered. The first stone was thrown by Nathan, the man who had lost his brother. It hit Achan in the shoulder, making him stagger. Then came others, and others. "Don't look!" Some mothers covered their young children's eyes. "Let them see," Caleb said aloud. "Let them learn the price of disobedience." The sound of stones striking flesh was horrifying. The screams of Achan's family cut through the air like knives. His wife tried to shield her younger children with her own body, but it was useless. "Mercy," she screamed until the end. "Mercy!" "Mercy was obedience from the beginning," Eleazar the priest murmured, standing beside Caleb. When the screams finally died down, a pile of broken bodies lay in the center of the valley. But judgment was not complete. "Bring fire," Joshua commanded. Men brought torches and firewood. The Babylonian robes, silver and gold, were thrown over the bodies. Then they set them on fire. The flames rose high and fierce, consuming everything, bodies, treasures, even the clothes they wore. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, making many turn away in nausea. "Why?" a young voice asked. Caleb saw it was Deborah, now a grown woman. "Why would God demand something so terrible?" "Because sin is a cancer," Caleb replied. "If it is not completely removed, it kills the whole body." But the children, they would grow up hating the God who killed their father. Caleb explained, though his own heart protested, they would become seeds of future rebellion. As the fire burned, Joshua had large stones brought in. One by one they were piled on top of the ashes, creating a permanent memorial. "This place will be called the Valley of Achor," he proclaimed. "The Valley of Disaster. Let all who pass through here remember, disobedience to God brings death." The sun was setting when the execution was over. The camp began to disperse in silence, each processing the horror they had witnessed. Caleb stood, watching the last embers die beneath the stones. Jephthah approached, his face pale. "Was it necessary?" he asked. "All that?" "Ask the 36 dead at Ai if it was necessary," Caleb replied dryly. "But the brutality—" "It's brutal," Caleb agreed. "Just as it was brutal when our fathers wanted to stone Joshua and me for speaking the truth. Just as it was brutal when 3,000 died trying to take Canaan without God." "And now?" Othniel asked, joining them. "Has the sin been removed?" "Now," Joshua appeared, his clothes still covered in ash. "We will attack Ai again, and this time we will win." "How can you be sure?" someone asked. "Because the Lord told me," Joshua replied simply. "The hindrance has been removed. His presence returns to us. Indeed, something had changed in the air. The oppression that had hung over the camp since the defeat had lifted. It was as if a window had been opened in a stuffy room. "I feel it," a young warrior whispered. "The presence, it's returned." That night, as the camp prepared for the new attack on Ai, Caleb visited Achan's tent. It was empty now, a grim reminder of the price of greed. On the floor he found a toy, a small wooden horse probably, belonging to one of his younger children. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the tragedy. It was necessary, he said to himself. It was necessary. "Caleb." Joshua entered the tent. "What are you doing here?" "Remembering." Caleb showed the toy, to never forget that every choice has consequences that go beyond ourselves. Achan forgot that. We all forget sometimes. Caleb put away the little horse. "That's why we need memorials, reminders. Will you keep this?" "Yes, and when we conquer Hebron, when I have my inheritance, I will place this in my house, so that my descendants will remember it." Joshua nodded solemnly. "Tomorrow we attack at dawn, 30,000 men. There it will fall. Yes, Caleb agreed. He will fall, because now we are clean before God. They left the tent together. In the distant valley, the pile of stones was a dark shadow against the starry sky, an eternal memorial to the day Israel learned that there is no bargaining with God. You know, Joshua said as they walked, there were times when I thought Moses was too harsh. Now I understand. Leadership requires heartbreaking decisions. But they are necessary, Caleb replied, so that the people may live. So that the promise may be fulfilled, Josue corrected. On the horizon, the first stars appeared. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Hebron waited. The giants waited, but first I had to fall. And now, without sin weakening them, it would fall. Ah, you ready for tomorrow? Joshua asked. I have been ready for 40 years, Caleb replied. A gentle wind blew through the camp, carrying the smell of campfires and the sound of war preparations. But it also carried something else. Renewed hope, restored resolve. Sin had been purged with fire and blood. Now the way was clear for the promise to be fulfilled. The 5 Amorite kings had surrounded Gibeon when the messengers arrived at the Israelite camp, their horses foaming at the mouth, nearly dead from exhaustion. Joshua! The first messenger fell to his knees, gasping. Gibeon is under siege! 5 armies, Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, all united against us. Caleb felt his blood race at the name Hebron. The giants had finally moved. Why should we help Gibeon? Simeon protested. They deceived us, pretending to be from distant lands. We have made a covenant with them, Joshua replied firmly. Our word has been given. We will march immediately. There are 5 armies, another leader argued, tens of thousands of warriors. And we have the Lord of hosts, Caleb intervened. Or have you forgotten Jericho? They marched all night, a column of 30,000 men, climbing the mountains under the starlight. Caleb marched beside Othniel, who now commanded 100. Are you nervous? He asked the young man. Anxious, Othniel corrected. We'll finally face the giants you talk so much about. Not all of them, Caleb replied. But it's a start. When the sun rose, it revealed a terrifying spectacle. The 5 armies had laid complete siege to Gibeon, their tents stretching like a dark sea around the city. There are so many of them, whispered a soldier. There were many, Joshua corrected, raising his spear. Now they are dead who don't even know it. Attack! The surprise attack was devastating. The Israelites descended from the mountains like an avalanche, catching the besieging armies completely off guard. Many Amorites were still asleep when the Israelite swords found their necks. For Israel, Caleb shouted, his sword slicing through a line of guards. For the living God! The battle quickly descended into chaos. The 5 kings tried to organize their troops, but surprise and terror had shattered their lines. It's the Israelites. Came a cry of panic. The ones who destroyed Jericho! Run! Another shouted. Run before your God destroys us! And they fled. Thousands of Amorite warriors abandoned their positions, running through the Beth Horon Pass in total panic. Pursue them, Joshua commanded. Don't let any of them escape. Then Caleb saw something that made him stop. The sun was high, but there was a problem. It would soon set, and in the darkness the enemies would escape. Joshua must have realized the same thing, because he suddenly stopped in the middle of the battlefield, raised his arms to the sky, and shouted in a voice that echoed through the valleys, Sun, stand still over Gibeon. Moon, stand still over the valley of Ajalon. For a moment nothing happened. Then, impossible. Othniel gasped beside Caleb. The sun stopped. It simply stopped, in its course across the sky, as if invisible hands held it in place. The shadows ceased to move. Time seemed suspended. "Keep fighting," Caleb shouted to his paralyzed men. "God has given us time. Use it." The chase continued under a sun that refused to set. But then something even more extraordinary happened. From the clear sky, rocks began to fall. Not ordinary hail, but enormous rocks, fist-sized and larger. "Protection," someone shouted, but the stones were aimed precisely. They fell only on the fleeing Amorites, crushing them by the hundreds. The Israelites passed unharmed through the deadly rain, protected by divine precision. "See that?" A young soldier pointed in wonder. "The rocks are chasing them." It was true. Groups of Amorites trying to hide were found by rocks falling with surgical precision. More died from the stones of heaven than from the swords of Israel. Caleb reached a group of giants, huge men from Hebron, each over 10 feet tall. One of them, finding himself surrounded, laughed bitterly. "So you're Caleb," said the giant, "the spy who said he could defeat us." 40 years ago, Caleb replied, twirling his sword, "and he was right. Your God fights for you." The giant pointed to the sky where the stones were still falling. "Without him, you are nothing." With him, Caleb stepped forward. "I am all I need to be." The fight was fierce. The giant had immense strength, but Caleb had something more, faith tested by 4 decades in the desert. When his sword finally found the giant's heart, it fell with a crash that shook the earth. "The giant has fallen," the cry echoed. "Caleb has killed a son of Anak." The news spread renewed courage among the Israelis. If the giants could fall, nothing was impossible. The hours passed, or should have passed. But the sun remained fixed. The soldiers fought in a perpetual light that should have turned to night long ago. "How long?" Othniel asked, exhausted but still fighting. "How long did the sun stand still?" "I don't know," Caleb replied, wiping blood from his forehead. "But it's enough time." The 5 kings were found hiding in a cave at Micah, trembling like terrified children. Joshua brought them out, forcing them to kneel before the entire army. "Put your feet on their necks," he ordered his captains. Caleb was one of the chosen ones. He placed his foot on the neck of the king of Hebron, the man who commanded the giants. "This," Joshua proclaimed, "is what the Lord will do to all your enemies." The kings were executed and hung from trees until sunset, when the sun finally allowed itself to move again. When darkness finally fell, the battlefield revealed the full extent of the massacre. Thousands of Amorites lay dead, many still with expressions of terror, crushed by impossible stones. "I counted almost a whole day," Elisha the priest said in wonder. "The sun stood still for almost a whole day. There has never been a day like this," Joshua declared, "neither before nor ever after, the day the Lord heard the voice of a man and stopped the heavens themselves." That night, as the camp celebrated, Caleb climbed a hill alone. He looked toward Hebron, now kingless but still teeming with giants. Othniel found him there, watching the stars that had finally appeared. "Thinking about Hebron?" the young man asked. "Always," Caleb replied, "but today I saw that it is possible." "The giants?" "I saw one die today." Caleb smiled fiercely. "They bleed like any man, and if God can stop the sun for us, it can bring down mountains," Othniel completed. Exactly. A meteor streaked across the sky, reminiscent of the rocks that had fallen earlier. Caleb took it as a sign. "You know," he said to Othniel, "your name means Lion of God. Today you have shown that you deserve it." "I learned from the best," Othniel replied. "But Caleb, if the sun obeys God, if the stones fall at his command," trying, "Mount Hebron will also fall," Othniel stated with conviction. Caleb placed his hand on the young man's shoulder, sensing in him the same faith that had sustained him for 40 years in the desert. "Yes," he agreed, looking once more at Hebron in the distant shadows. It too will fall. The ashes were still smoldering in Hazor when the messenger arrived with news that made Caleb's blood run cold. Jabin, king of the mighty city, had summoned the greatest alliance ever seen in Canaan. "How many?" Joshua asked, his voice tense. "Countless, sir," the spy replied, still pale from what he had seen. "Like the sand of the sea, kings of the north, the south, the mountains, the valleys, all united under Jabin, and—" He swallowed hard. "They have horses and chariots of iron, hundreds of them." A murmur of fear ran through the war council. Israel had never faced war chariots. "Iron chariots," Simeon murmured. "In Egypt, they said a chariot was worth 100 men on foot." "So we'll die." Caleb stood up abruptly, angered by the defeatism. "After all we've seen? The sea parted, the sun stood still, rocks fell from the sky, and now you fear wheels and horses." "But there are so many," another leader protested. "There were so many in Gibeon too," Othniel intervened, supporting Caleb. "And where are they now? Feeding the vultures." Joshua raised his hand for silence. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, there was fire in them. "The Lord has spoken," he announced. "By this time tomorrow, everyone will be dead. We will hamstring the horses. We will burn the chariots. We will not fear, for he has given them into our hands." They marched at night, as they had before, but this time the enemy was waiting. At the waters of Merom, the coalition had set up camp, a tent city stretching as far as the eye could see. "Look," a soldier whispered at dawn. "The cars!" Hundreds of chariots were lined up, their polished metal gleaming in the rising sun. The horses neighed nervously, as if sensing the coming battle. "Remember," Caleb instructed his men, "horses are plains animals. On rocks and slopes they are useless. Take the fight to rough terrain." "What if we don't make it?" asked a young warrior, clearly terrified. "Then die standing up," Caleb replied dryly. "Not on your knees." The attack began with the sound of the shofar. Israel descended from the hills like a storm, catching the coalition in the midst of their morning preparations. "To the chariots!" Jabin shouted. "Crush these desert slaves!" The chariots advanced, wheels thundering, spears pointed like predatory teeth. For a moment it seemed they would crush the Israelite lines like wheat under a sickle, but then something extraordinary happened. The horses began to stumble. The chariot wheels caught on rocks that hadn't been there moments before. It was as if the earth itself rose up against the invaders. "The wheels!" a driver shouted in panic. "They're coming loose." Carriages began to topple, throwing their occupants to the ground. Panicked horses trampled their own masters. What should have been a devastating charge became a chaos of twisted metal and screams. "Now!" Joshua commanded. While they're confused, Israel advanced. Caleb led his platoon straight to the center where Jabin's banner flew. The king of Hazor was in his royal chariot, desperately trying to control his maddened horses. "Jabin!" Caleb shouted. "Get down and fight!" "Like a man!" The king turned, his face contorted with anger and fear. You're the crazy old man who claims he can defeat giants." "I've already defeated one," Caleb replied, stepping forward. "You'll be easier." Jabin leapt from the chariot, wielding a jeweled sword. He was a skilled warrior, trained since childhood. But Caleb had something no amount of training could give, the absolute certainty of God's promised victory. The fight was brutal and swift. Jabin struck with perfect technique, but Caleb fought with divine purpose. When his sword finally pierced the royal armor, Jabin fell to his knees, blood bubbling from his lips. "What?" he gasped. "There were many of us." "Numbers mean nothing," Caleb replied. when God fights on the other side. With Jabin's death, panic spread. Lesser kings tried to flee, abandoning their armies, but Israel pursued them relentlessly. There, Othniel pointed, the king of Madon is trying to escape. Not today, Caleb replied, running after him. One by one, the kings were captured or killed. By noon, as Joshua had prophesied, the great coalition was destroyed. Thousands of bodies littered the countryside. Dead horses and broken chariots created a graveyard of shattered ambitions. Bring the captured kings, Joshua ordered. 11 kings were dragged forward, their royal robes torn and stained with blood and mud. Some wept. Others retained a shred of broken dignity. You have oppressed your people, Joshua declared. You have sacrificed children to your idols. You have enslaved the weak. Today justice comes. Mercy, the king of Akshah pleaded. We have gold, treasures. Your gold cannot buy the innocent blood you shed, Josue replied coldly. The kings were executed one by one, their bodies hung from trees as a warning. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Caleb counted in his mind. 31, he said to Joshua. 31 kings have fallen since we crossed the Jordan. And how many more will come? Joshua replied, watching the bodies sway in the wind. That night, while they were burning the captured chariots, fulfilling the order to keep nothing for themselves, Caleb found a map in a real tent. It showed all of Canaan, with Hebron prominently marked. Do you still think about them? Joshua approached. The giants? Every day, Caleb admitted. 45 years have passed since I first saw them. I'm old, Joshua, but the promise stands, Joshua concluded. When we are ready, you will take Hebron. When? There was urgency in Caleb's voice. Soon, Joshua promised. Very soon. A young messenger approached, interrupting the conversation. Commanders, we found something in Jabin's tents. Records about Hebron. What do they say? Caleb asked anxiously. The Anakim, the giants, they know about you, Caleb. They know you promised to take the city. And? They're preparing, fortifying. They say... The messenger hesitated. Say. Idr, Caleb demanded. They say they have a champion, Talmai, the greatest of the sons of Anak, 10 feet tall. He has sworn to drink your blood from a skull made from your own skull. A heavy silence fell over the group. Then Caleb began to laugh, a rich, genuine sound that surprised everyone. 3.5 meters, he said with a laugh. Good, it'll be easier to hit. Aren't you afraid? The messenger asked, astonished. Fear? Boy, I saw the sea part. The sun stands still, rocks fall from the sky, and 31 kings bite the dust. Why would I fear a man too big to fit through a door? The others started laughing too, the tension dissolving. Besides, Caleb continued, his smile turning fierce, I've waited 45 years for this fight. Let Talmai sharpen his sword and prepare his victory speech. He looked south, where Hebron waited in darkness, but there was a throne of giants waiting for Caleb. The command tent was silent when Caleb entered, his steady footsteps echoing despite his 85 years. Joshua looked up from the map spread out on the table, surprised by the unexpected visitor. Caleb, it's late, you should be resting. Rest? Caleb laughed. A hoarse but lively sound. I will rest when I have what is rightfully mine. The other tribal leaders, gathered to divide the conquered land, turned to watch. Some whispered among themselves, Old Caleb, the last of the original spies besides Joshua. What are you talking about? Joshua asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew. Caleb walked to the center of the tent, squaring his shoulders. In the torchlight, the scars of countless battles were visible on his arms, each telling a story of faith and war. 45 years, Joshua. His voice cut through the silence. 45 years since Moses made me a promise at Kadesh Barnea. I remember, Joshua replied softly. Then you also remember, Caleb continued, his voice gaining strength, that he promised that the land my feet have trodden would be my inheritance. Hebron, Joshua, the mountain of the giants. A murmur ran through the tent. Hebron was still in the hands of the Anakim, the giants who terrified even the bravest warriors. Caleb, Eleazar the high priest, interjected gently, "You are 85 years old. Hebron is—" "I know exactly what Hebron is," Caleb interrupted, his eyes blazing with fire. "It's where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the three sons of Anak, are. It's where the walls are highest and the warriors are most feared." "And yet you still want her?" asked Othniel, who was present as a representative of the young commanders. Caleb turned to him, and for a moment it was not an old man standing there, but the same warrior who had crossed the Jordan decades before. "Do I want it? Boy, it's mine by divine promise. And what's more," he rolled up his sleeves, revealing still muscular arms. "Look, I have the same strength today as I did at 40. "Impossible," someone murmured. "With God, nothing is impossible," Caleb thundered. He picked up a heavy spear leaning against the wall and swung it over his head with the ease of a young warrior. "The Lord has kept me alive, as he promised, not just alive, but strong." He drove the spear into the ground with such force that the wood trembled. "All these years," he continued, now pacing the tent like a caged lion, "I've seen younger men fall. I've seen generations born and die. But I remained. Why? By chance? No, because God had a purpose." "What purpose?" Joshua asked, even though he knew the answer. "To show that his promises do not grow old," Caleb replied. "That time does not weaken his word. 45 years, Joshua. Any other man my age would be bent over a staff waiting to die. But look at me." He flexed his arms, showing muscles that defied his age. "This morning," he continued, "I raced with the young warriors in training. I defeated half of them. At noon I practiced with my sword for 2 hours straight. This afternoon I carried stones to fortify the camp. Tell me, is that the strength of an old man?" "It's miraculous," Eleazar admitted. "It's faithfulness," Caleb corrected. "God promised through Moses, and God doesn't lie." Simeon, the leader of his tribe, stood up hesitantly. "But Caleb, even with your strength, the giants—" "Talmai, say you are the greatest warrior who ever lived." "Talmai," Caleb spat the name. "I knew his father. I saw his grandfather. They are big, yes, strong, certainly, but you know what they are not? Protected by the God of Israel." He walked up to Joshua, his eyes meeting his old friends. "Do you remember what we told the people 45 years ago? When everyone was trembling with fear. We can conquer it," Joshua recited, his voice softening with memory. "And what changed?" Caleb asked. "We've gotten older, yes, but has God gotten weaker? Have the promises expired?" "No," Joshua answered firmly. "Then give me what is mine." Caleb held out his hand. "Give me Hebron. Give me the mountain where the giants live." The silence that followed was profound. Then one of the young warriors spoke. "Lord Caleb, if you go to Hebron, I will follow you. And me?" Another stood up. "And me?" More voices joined in. Soon dozens of warriors were on their feet, volunteering to follow the elder in. A battle many considered suicidal. Caleb looked around, his eyes wet but blazing. "You see," he said to Joshua, "faith is contagious. Fear is too, but faith ignites hearts like fire in dry straw." Joshua slowly got up, walked over to Caleb, and hugged him. "Old friend," he said, his voice breaking, "you were faithful. When everyone doubted, you remained when everyone else fell. Who am I to deny what God promised?" He turned to a scribe. "Record this. I, Joshua son of Nun, give to Caleb son of Jephunneh the city of Hebron and all its land, according to the promise made by Moses, the servant of the Lord." The tent erupted in cheers. Warriors clashed spears against shields, the thunderous sound filling the night. "When will you leave?" Joshua asked. "At dawn," Caleb replied without hesitation. "I waited 45 years, not a day more." "You will need men." "I'll only take volunteers," Caleb interrupted. "I don't want anyone who goes out of obligation. This battle requires faith, not just strength." Othniel took a step forward. "I will go, Uncle Caleb. It will be an honor to fight alongside you." "And you will have more than honor, boy," Caleb replied, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I promise my daughter Achsah to the man who conquers Kiriath Sepher." Surprised murmurs filled the tent. Achsah was known for her beauty and wisdom. "Are you offering your daughter as a prize?" someone asked. "I'm offering you the opportunity to prove yourself worthy of it," Caleb corrected. "And who better to conquer a city than someone willing to follow a mad old man against giants?" More laughter and cheers filled the air. But then Caleb raised his hand for silence. "One last thing," he said, his voice growing solemn. "Some of you will follow me out of loyalty, some for glory, some for Achsah. But I want you to know this. We will not just conquer a city. We will prove that the God of Israel does not grow old, does not weaken, does not forget." He looked each man in the eye. "In Hebron, we will show that giants fall before faith, whether the one carrying it is 18 or 80 years old. We will show that God's promises have no expiration date." The energy in the tent was electric. Men who moments before had considered Caleb an old dreamer now saw him for what he was, a warrior anointed by God for one last great victory. "Rest well tonight," Caleb concluded. "Tomorrow we march to Hebron. Tomorrow we call on a promise of 45 years. As he emerged from the tent, his silhouette against the torchlight wasn't that of an 85-year-old man. It was that of someone over whom time had no power, sustained by a strength that transcended muscle and bone. "Give me this mountain where the Anakim live." His words echoed in the night. The morning mist still shrouded the valley when Caleb's army reached the pass leading to Hebron. The warriors stopped abruptly, silence falling over them like a shroud as they contemplated what awaited them. 3 colossal figures stood at the valley's entrance: Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. The smallest of them stood nearly 10 feet tall. Talmai in the center was a mountain of muscle and fury, his head reaching nearly 12 feet. Divine mercy. A young warrior dropped his spear, the metal clanging against the stones. They're bigger than in the stories," another whispered, taking an involuntary step back. Caleb watched silently from the front of his troops, his eyes studying every detail of the giants. Their armor was made of solid bronze, each plate the size of a normal shield. The spears they wielded resembled the trunks of young trees, their points glinting deadly in the rising sun. "Caleb!" Talmai's voice thundered through the valley, sending birds flying in panic. "Caleb, you old fool, have you come to die at last?" The giant took a step forward, and the ground shook under his weight. Behind Caleb, more warriors retreated. "Do you see my sword?" Talmai raised a blade that would have taken 3 normal men to lift. "It was forged especially for you. 45 years my father waited for you and died waiting. But I will have the honor of crushing the last of the foolish spies." Othniel approached Caleb, his voice tense. "Uncle, the men are terrified. Some are already talking about retreating. Let them fear." Caleb replied calmly, his eyes never leaving the giants. "Fear will make them appreciate victory even more." "Victory?" A soldier's voice trembled behind them. "How can we win that?" It was then that Sesai, the giant on the left, began to laugh, a sound that echoed through the mountains like thunder. "Look," he pointed to the Israelite troops. "They tremble like leaves. Caleb, you brought children into a war of men." "No," Ahiman, the third giant, corrected with a cruel smile. "I brought ants into a war of gods." The three giants began to pound, their weapons on the ground in unison, creating a warlike rhythm that made the very air vibrate. Behind them, the army of Hebron appeared, hundreds of Canaanite warriors, emboldened by the presence of their impossible champions. "We're lost," Caleb heard someone murmur. "We should go back while we can." It was too much. Caleb turned to his troops, and his voice cut through the fear like a sword. "Back! Back! Look at me!" He ripped off his helmet, revealing his white hair and weather-beaten face. "I'm 85 years old. 85. If anyone should be afraid, it would be me. But do you know what I see when I look at those giants? Absolute silence. Even the giants stopped their drumming, curious. I see men," Caleb continued. "Big, yes. Strong, certainly. But men, they bleed when cut. They fall when their legs are broken. They die when their hearts are pierced. But their size," someone protested weakly. "The size." Caleb laughed, a sound that surprised everyone. "Goliath was big too. Where is he now? Og of Bashan was a giant. Moses killed him. The Red Sea was huge and impossible. God parted it." He walked among his troops, looking each man in the eye. 45 years ago, 10 spies saw these same giants and said, "We are grasshoppers before them." Do you know what happened to those 10 men? They died of the plague. Othniel answered. Aloud, "Exactly. They died on the same day, but Joshua and I, who said we could defeat them, are still alive." Why? Because we saw with eyes of faith, not fear. A murmur began to run through the troops. Some straightened their shoulders. "Caleb," Talmai shouted impatiently, "enough speeches. Come die like a man." Caleb slowly turned to face the giant. "Talmai, son of Anak, your father is dead. Your grandfather is dead. Your line will end today. We'll see," Talmai roared and began to advance, each step making the earth tremble. "Formation," Caleb commanded, but then he did something no one expected. He dropped his shield. He stripped off his heavy armor, leaving only a light tunic and his sword. "What are you doing?" Othniel grabbed his arm. "You need protection." "No," Caleb replied, his eyes shining with iron determination. "I need everyone to see that an old man without armor can defeat a giant with all the protection in the world. I need them to see that our strength comes not from bronze or iron, but from the living God." "You're crazy," a soldier shouted. "Crazy?" Caleb smiled. "Perhaps. But I'm the madman who survived 40 years in the desert, who saw Jericho fall, who saw the sun stand still. If that's madness, I prefer it to cowardly sanity." Talmai was now 50 meters away, his shadow covering the field like a black cloud. His brothers flanked him, creating a wall of flesh and metal. "Last chance, old man," Talmai shouted. "Kneel and die quickly, or fight and die in agony." Caleb took a step forward, then another, and another. Then, doing something that left both armies speechless, he began to run. Not the careful trot of an elder, but the full sprint of a warrior in his prime. "Impossible," someone whispered. "He's 85 years old." "By the God of Israel," Caleb roared as he ran, "by the promise of 45 years. Talmai raised his gigantic sword, preparing to cleave the old man in half. Sesai positioned her spear. Ahiman swung, his mace in deadly circles. Behind Caleb, his troops held their breath. Some covered their eyes, not wanting to see the inevitable slaughter. "Look!" Othniel shouted. "Don't look away! See what faith can do!" The distance was closing rapidly. 40 meters, 30, 20. The giant smiled, savoring certain victory. 10 meters. Talmai began to bring his sword down in a deadly arc. 5 meters. And then, at the last possible second, Caleb did something that defied his age, defied logic, defied everything except faith. He leaped, not the hesitant leap of an old man, but the mighty leap of a lion. Time seemed to slow. Talmai's sword sliced through the air where Caleb had stood a moment before. The giant's eyes widened in surprise, and Caleb ran against them with drawn sword. Caleb's blade found Talmai's exposed neck, just as the giant tried to recover from the missed blow. Blood gushed like a scarlet fountain, and the colossus staggered back, its massive hands trying to staunch the fatal wound. "Impossible," Talmai gurgled, his eyes wide with shock. "You're old man with the strength of the eternal," Caleb replied, spinning to avoid Sesai's desperate attack. The second giant spear whizzed past where Caleb had been, plunging deep into the earth. Before Sesai could pull it back, Caleb ran up the shaft like a ramp, his light weight and agility defying all 85 years. How? Sesai barely had time to question before Caleb's sword pierced her thigh, severing vital arteries. The giant fell to his knees with a roar of pain, and Caleb didn't hesitate. He leaped onto Sesai's massive shoulders and drove his blade deep between the armor plates, straight into the heart. "Two!" Othniel shouted from the battlefield. "Two! Giants fallen!" The Israelite troops erupted in war cries, renewed faith coursing through their veins like liquid fire. They began to advance, but Ahiman, the third giant, blocked their path, his mace swinging in deadly arcs. "Old tricks," Ahiman roared, "but I am not my foolish brothers." He struck with surprising speed for his size. The mace came down like a meteor, and Caleb barely managed to roll to the side. The impact created a crater in the ground, sending rocks flying in all directions. "Tired, old man?" Ahiman scoffed, raising his mace again. "Where's your agility now?" In fact, Caleb was panting. The exertion of the first two fights was taking its toll, and Ahiman was the smartest of the three brothers. "Uncle Caleb." Othniel began to run to help. "No," Caleb raised his hand. "This is my battle, my promise." Ahiman laughed, a sound that chilled the blood. "Your promise will die with you." The giant charged, the mace describing a horizontal arc that could split a tree in half. Caleb waited and waited, and at the last possible moment he fell backward, letting the weapon pass over him. But he didn't just fall. As he fell, he kicked Ahiman's exposed knee with both legs. The crack was audible even over the war cries. The giant screamed and staggered. "You learned to fight against men your own size," Caleb said, standing up quickly. "But I learned to chop down cedars of Lebanon." And they thought they wouldn't fall either. Ahiman tried to steady himself with his injured leg, but Caleb was already moving. He ran toward the staggering giant, using a rock as a step, and leapt again, this time aiming for his exposed face. "By the God of Abraham!" Caleb shouted as he flew through the air. "By the God of Moses, by the God who does not forget." His sword pierced Ahiman's eye, piercing all the way to his brain. The giant stood paralyzed for a moment, as if he couldn't believe he was dead. Then, like a mountain crumbling, he fell backward with a crash that echoed through the valley. The silence that followed was absolute. Both armies were paralyzed, processing the impossible they had witnessed. Caleb stood over the dead giant's chest, covered in blood but unharmed, his sword raised to the sky. "Hebron!" he roared. "Hebron belongs to Israel. The promise is fulfilled." It was as if a dam had broken. The Israelite warriors surged forward with deafening shouts, their faith transformed into holy fury. The defenders of Hebron, seeing their invincible champions slain by an ancient man, fled in utter panic. The gates Someone shouted, "Close the city gates!" But it was too late. Othniel led a platoon straight to the gates, arriving before they could be stopped. "For Caleb!" the men shouted. "For the immortal warrior!" The battle for the streets of Hebron was fierce but brief. Without their giants, the defenders were mere men facing warriors, inflamed by having witnessed a miracle. Caleb, still covered in the giant's blood, walked slowly through the conquered streets. Citizens hid, expecting massacre, but he ordered, "Spare those who surrender, kill only those who resist. This city will be our home, not our cemetery." In the center of Hebron, they found the palace of the Anakim, a massive structure with towering doors and gigantic furniture. Caleb entered and found the throne of Anak, a stone chair large enough to seat 3 normal men. "Burn this," he ordered. "Let there be no memory of the terror these giants spread." "But it's a relic," protested one of the men. "It's a symbol of oppression," Caleb corrected. "God doesn't need giant thrones, he needs faithful hearts." By sunset, Hebron was completely under Israelite control. Caleb stood at the highest point of the walls, surveying the land that was now his by right and conquest. Joshua arrived with reinforcements at dusk, having received news of the battle. He found Caleb still on the walls. "So it's true," Joshua said in wonder. "You killed the 3 sons of Anak all by yourself." "Not alone," Caleb corrected. "With God, always with God." "At 85 years old," Joshua shook his head, "when men half your age trembled. Age is just a number when God is your strength," Caleb replied. Othniel approached, still covered in blood from the battle. "Uncle Caleb, we found something in the city archives, records dating back 400 years. And there is a prophecy," Othniel said carefully, "from the ancient Canaanite priests. It said that Hebron would only fall when time has no power over the conqueror." Caleb and Joshua looked at each other. They thought it meant a god, Othniel continued. "Someone immortal. But it was about you, wasn't it? A man over whom time lost its power through faith." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands, wrinkled with age but still strong, still capable. 45 years, he murmured. "I've waited 45 years, and in all that time the promise has never aged, never weakened." "And now," Joshua asked, "will you finally rest?" "Rest?" Caleb smiled. "There is still Kiriath Sepher to conquer. I have promised my daughter Achsah to the man who takes her." "I will take it," Othniel declared with youthful confidence. "After what I saw today, I know that anything is possible with faith." Caleb placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then go, boy. Show that faith is not a privilege of the elderly." That night, as Hebron celebrated under a new banner, Caleb stood alone in what had been the Hall of the Giants. In the place where Anak's throne had stood, he drove a simple wooden stake with an inscription. Here God fulfilled his promise to Caleb, son of Jephunneh. "Let all who read this know, God's promises have no expiration date." A young woman approached, Achsah, his daughter. "Father, the elders say you will be remembered forever. Let it not be remembered of me," Caleb replied, "but of what God did through me. Let Hebron be a witness that he honors his word, no matter how much time passes." Achsah embraced her father, and together they looked out the window at the conquered city. Torches burned in celebration, and songs of victory filled the air. "Was it everything you hoped for?" she asked. "No," Caleb admitted. "It was more, because I didn't just conquer a city. I proved that faith can move mountains and bring down giants, and Hebron became an eternal symbol of faith that stands the test of time." The gentle afternoon wind blew through the hills of Judah, caressing the ancient stones of Hebron. Atop the wall, an elderly man stood, his gaze firm yet serene. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, no longer wielded his sword or raised a war cry. His hands, scarred by time, rested on the parapet, gazing out at the city that had been the stage for the greatest promise of his life. All around, the fields bloomed again. Where once giants sowed terror, now families sowed wheat. Hebrew children ran through the streets where in times past fear reigned. And at this sight, Caleb's heart overflowed with gratitude. "Lord," he murmured, raising his eyes to the sky, "I've waited 45 years for this moment. You've never forgotten." The sunset's glow bathed Hebron in golden hues, as if the city itself had been crowned with light. Caleb silently understood that this scene was not just a personal victory. It was a sign for all generations. God's word does not fade with time, does not lose its validity, does not bow to oblivion. He sat on a nearby rock, breathing deeply. The aches in his body reminded him of his age, but his spirit remained young, fueled by the flame of faith. He recalled the days of slavery in Egypt, the desert crossings, the people's rebellion, the years of waiting, and the bloody battles. Everything pointed to that moment, the promise fulfilled. "Father," said Asa, approaching gently, "the people ask if there will still be giants to face." Caleb smiled with the wisdom of someone who had seen entire generations pass before his eyes. "There always will be, my daughter. Every generation has its giants. Some are shaped like men, others like doubts, fears, and temptations. But the answer never changes: faith in the God who never fails." Asa held her father's hand, and together they stood in silence, watching the city illuminated by golden light. In that moment, Hebron was no longer just stone and walls. It had become a living symbol that time can age men, but never weaken the word of the eternal. And so, as the sun set over the mountains, a message was engraved for the ages: the faith that resists always wins. If this story spoke to your heart, 2 other videos will appear on your screen with biblical characters who also lived promises and miracles. Click subscribe to the channel and leave your like. May the same God who strengthened Caleb in his old age and led him to conquer Hebron also strengthen your faith, because sometimes the greatest victory comes after the long wait.